Hello, welcome to the Bradley Museum. My name is Lindsay and I'm here today to share a special Christmas treat with you. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we are situated from time immemorial has been home to many First Nations people, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat First Nations. Most recently, before British settlement, this house was situated on land belonging to the Mississaugas. For early settler families like the Bradleys, Christmas time was a time when they enjoyed all of their favorite foods. And the favorite we're making today is gingerbread. Now for us, gingerbread is something we usually just have at Christmas. But for early settlers like the Bradleys, they would have had it year-round, both as a cake and cookie, because the ingredients used to make it were very cheap and easy to find. One of the things that would have been a special Christmas food for them is something like the oranges you might see on the mantle behind me. And that's because oranges didn't grow in Ontario's cold climate, which means that they might be a once-a-year treat because they were expensive and hard to find. In fact, a family might share one single orange amongst all of their members. The Bradley family had 9 people in their family. Can you imagine sharing one orange with 9 people? But let's get started on our gingerbread recipe. Like I said, it's a really simple recipe. It only has 5 ingredients. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by mixing 4 of our ingredients in the bowl together. The first thing we're using is the sweetener, and we're using molasses. Molasses was the cheapest sweetener that you could buy in early settler times because it was the byproduct of making refined white sugar. And its color, how dark it is, that's what's going to give the gingerbread that nice brown color. Now, molasses is a pretty strong taste, so a lot of people don't like it, but I like it. I used to eat it on my pancakes, actually, growing up. Now that we've added the molasses in, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our ginger, because, of course, you can't have gingerbread without ginger. And we're going to add a tablespoon of ginger in. These cookies are going to be quite well flavored. And you'll notice I'm just using a regular spoon. I'm not using any special measuring spoons or measuring cups. And that's because for settler families like the Bradleys, you just used whatever you had lying around the kitchen. So when you used a tablespoon, you just used a spoon that you would use to eat your dinner at the table. If you needed to use a teaspoon, you would just use the spoon that you would use to stir your sugar in your tea. And we're going to add a teaspoon of baking soda to this mixture now. And then the last thing we're going to add right now is some hot water. And at home, you're just going to get hot water straight from your tap. If I was Mrs. Bradley, I would have heated this water up a little bit by the fire to make sure it was nice and warm. And we're going to add about 1/3 cup of water in. I'm just going to eyeball it. And now we're going to mix this all together. And we want to mix it until we get a liquid that has a nice light brown color. There we go. That's looking nice and light brown and smooth. So we're going to add our last ingredient, and that is flour. Today we're using white flour, but they probably would have used whole wheat flour. Again, it was cheaper and easier to make your own whole wheat flour or buy whole wheat flour if you needed to. And we're not just going to dump it right in. We're going to sift it first. So I'm going to measure my cup of flour, again, just using an old teacup. We're going to dump it into the sifter. There's 1 cup. Now we're going to add our 2nd cup. And we'll start by mixing this in. Now you might notice that my mixture is bubbling up a little bit, and that is the reaction of the baking soda and the warm water. And that's what's going to be the leavening agent or the part of the cookies that's going to make them puff up and rise. Now, if you're mixing, you can adjust your recipe. If your dough is a little dry like this, you're just going to add a little more water. If your dough is a little wet, you're just going to add a little more flour. This dough, like I said, is really easy, only 5 ingredients, and it's not too complicated to make. It's pretty forgiving. Excellent. Now, when it gets to this stage, that's a good time to use your simplest and easiest kitchen tools, which are your hands. I'm just going to add a little bit more flour in there because now my dough's gone from too dry to too sticky. And I'm just going to mix until our dough is nice and smooth and isn't sticking too badly to my fingers. Excellent, that looks pretty good. It's not sticking to the bowl as much. Now, if you're doing this at home, I suggest that you let your dough sit for about 15 minutes or so. That will make it a little bit easier to roll out. But if you don't want to do that, you can roll it straight like this. You're going to want to make sure whatever surface you're using to roll on is nice and well floured. And you're going to want to make sure that your rolling pin is also floured. And then you're going to split the dough in half. And you're going to roll it out to about 1/4 of an inch thick. And don't worry if there's a lot of flour on it at this point. Trust me, it's better to have a little more flour on it than it is to have your dough stick to everything. That looks pretty good, just like that. Now, the next step is to cut out your cookies. And you can use a number of things for this. You can use a plain cutter, which I suggest, because this dough tends to work better with plain cutters, and you can just cut out some circles like that. If you didn't have a cookie cutter at all, that's fine. You can also use a knife, and you can cut just squares of gingerbread, which is really the easiest way to do it. Like that. Or maybe you would like to try a fancier shape. You might like to do a traditional gingerbread man shape, which is a tradition that goes back to the 16th century in Germany when they used to make gingerbread houses. Sometimes, though, when you use this type of dough with really fancy shapes, the heads of the men fall out. So we usually find a circle is the easiest, but we'll try a little man here. Now that our cookies are cut, our next step is going to be to bake them. Now, at home, you'll use your oven preheated to 350 degrees Celsius, but here we just have the open hearth or the fire to cook on. So we're going to cook our cookies on something called a griddle pan, and it is made out of cast iron, and it looks like something you might use to cook pancakes on. And we're going to cook these cookies just like pancakes. We're going to take them, we're going to put them right on our pan, and we're going to hang our pan over the fire. Now, we're going to need to keep a pretty close eye on these because they burn really quickly when they're cooking over the fire. So we're going to let them cook just a little bit on one side, but not too long. When we're cooking them over the fire like this, it usually only takes about 2 minutes or so to cook them. At home, you'll start out with about 5 minutes in the oven and then check and see if they need more time. Now, you may have noticed that we have our hearth, the mantle of the hearth, decorated in greenery, and that was traditionally how early settler families like the Bradleys would decorate for Christmas. They didn't have a lot of items to choose from like we do for decorations, so they would just bring whatever they could find in nature inside. And the greenery was great because it reminded you that spring was coming again. Christmas time is in the middle of winter. It's the coldest time of year. It's the darkest time of year. And bringing in the greenery really helped you remember that light was going to come, that there was going to be warmth. Now, if you could afford to, you could also add lemons and oranges and pineapples to your decoration. Not only did those bright colors also remind you of warmth and sunshine, but they, like I said before, were really special Christmas treats because they were hard to find here in Ontario. So they would be something you might just enjoy at Christmas time. So decorating with them would not only be special because you would get to eat them after, but it would also let everyone know that you were doing very well, because if you could afford to decorate with a pineapple and other tropical fruits, it meant that your life here in Canada was going well. Let's give our cookies a check. And perfect. So just grab my fancy little shard here, these on top. And so we can see that our gingerbread here has cooked perfectly. It's nice and brown, a little bit soft, but not too soft. And inside we have that nice dark gingerbread color. Now this recipe makes a cookie that is very strong, but still soft. So if you like that type of gingerbread, you will enjoy this.